Hi, everybody. It's really great to be here today. I'm so thankful that Opus invited me to do this. I'm really thankful that that we're doing this so close to Christmas as well, because doing I don't teach as much watercolor as I used to. I've kind of slowed down on that over the last year or two. And for Opus to offer this as a free gift to you, for me to be able to show up and do that as well, it does feel like I get to give a little bit of a gift today in sharing my watercolor process and the way I make art that reflects my heart. And it's a topic that's really near and dear to me. And when I'm allowed to talk about, when I'm allowed, that sounds weird, when I give myself permission to talk about why I make art, I get really passionate and I get really excited because I've realized over the years that I'm not just making art because I want to see something beautiful on the wall. That's a wonderful side effect. But I get to make art because it's a way of giving myself permission to be authentically who I am, to make my painting practice a place where everything is allowed, where I can surprise myself with what I want to share and show in my paintings, where I can give myself the gift of beauty, give myself the gift of time, and even give myself the gift of being allowed to make a big, ugly mess that nobody gets to see but me. And I think that's really important and really freeing, because there are very few places in our lives where we get to just show up a hot mess. And in my art practice, I get to do that. And it's a process. I'm teaching myself how to do that because I started out showing up in my art practice as a perfectionist who didn't want to make a mistake, and who felt embarrassed or ashamed of her mistakes. And so over the years, it has gradually changed, where I felt more free to be present, to notice, and to really love what I do. And it's really important to me to share that. I know you might have come here just wanting to see me paint, and we're going to get to that. But I think it's so important for me to talk about why I paint the way I paint. Because until I talk about my why, you're going to show up and you're going to try to paint like me, and you're not going to match me because you're meant to paint like you. And giving yourself permission to do that is very freeing as well. Landscapes are important to me. That's what we're going to focus on today. And I was telling Pamela, I woke up 2 o'clock in the morning last night thinking, why am I not painting a winter scene today? And I'm not. I'm going to show you my reference photo. Actually, I'll show you that right now. I kind of went through my photos of places I've been, things I've seen, and this photo popped up in my cluster of photos that I saved them. I saved them in my Google Photos. I put a little star on that, on anything I think that I might like to paint one day. And this photo popped up from a recent trip to the eastern side of Canada. This is actually in Nova Scotia. We were driving from Peggy's Cove to Halifax, and we stopped for lunch beside this little lake. Where the wood pieces you see at the bottom are the picnic table. So I had this wonderful stretch of 45 minutes or so where this was my view. And so I'm showing you a reference photo that's very personal to me. And it's not just personal to me, but it's yeah, it's somewhere I've been, but it's also somewhere a little bit unfamiliar. And that's kind of interesting because when you're choosing to paint a place where you maybe don't spend every day, somewhere that's a little bit different and new, it can be easy to bring your own interpretation as a resident of your own home area. So as a Northern British Columbia resident, I'm looking at this reference photo as someone from the North. And in the North, one thing that I think stands out to me about this photo is the tree in the foreground, because it is, I believe, a maple tree, and it's too cold for them to grow up here. And so right away, I have something that's unfamiliar to me in this reference photo. I would also I have a word to describe reference photos like this. And sometimes I would describe something like this as almost a calendar picture. There's very little photo editing that I would need to do in order for this to look good on a calendar page. It's got all the things. It's got an interesting shape in the foreground. It's got a beautiful lake. It's got an interesting sky. It lets you look off in the distance. There's rocks, there's grass, there's reflections, there's a lot going on. And so it kind of feels like a whole package kind of picture where everything in the painting or in the photo contributes to making this an interesting photo. And the truth of the matter is when I look at a photograph like this, when I choose it to paint, that idea of this being a whole package kind of photo means that um, it's also a really difficult photo to paint, and to paint it intuitively, to paint it as an artist who wants to put her own spin on it and maybe edit out things that aren't working. And I was almost regretting choosing this photo because I almost prefer to pick photographs that can be a little bit difficult to paint, that have a few things missing, because it's easier to simplify them or to exaggerate or embellish them. Something that feels like it already has everything going on, I'm a lot more likely to feel like I'm going to be really tied to my reference photo when I go to paint it. The other thing I know about my reference photo is that when I go to paint it the first time, I'm probably not going to come up with something that I'm happy with. My first version generally tends to be pretty controlled and very literal to the reference photo. And so I didn't want to bore you with doing a really literal version on camera. Our time is precious, and I want to do some experimental things while we're painting today. So I'm going to just show you the first couple of versions of this scene that I painted and talk to you a little bit about my process. This was actually the first version I did. And maybe you're thinking, well, that's not that literal. Let's pop that reference photo up so we can see it. There we go. It's just tiny, but it's there. So you can see that there's a lot of things that are very different about this first version. And of course, I have the advantage of having painted landscapes for many years. So I already know what colors I like. I already can give myself permission to be a little bit exaggerated with the colors in my tree trunks. And I've allowed a lot of softness and fluidity to happen in this first version of the painting. And one reason I knew I did that was because I already know that my first version is where the experimenting begins. So it's okay if some of my colors blur together, if some of the colors I choose are wrong, if some of my shapes just don't seem to fit. I'm not loving the way my lake and my distant landscape is feeling closer than it should be. So I'm already feeling like maybe there's some things I'm definitely going to change, but at least this is where I get my first initial nerves out. And so that's kind of my thought process going into start a painting. I am also starting with some decisions that are going to help me in future versions of the painting. I'm already thinking about what colors I'm going to choose, what colors I'm not going to probably repeat, and what colors I'm really enjoying using. Choosing the right warm yellow, for example, was something that felt important to this painting. And figuring out how to combine that, how to choose other colors that are going to work well with that yellow was a big part of this process. And after that first version, I actually went into my sketchbook and decided I needed to do a little bit of understanding of my painting, of my photograph, using some sketching. And so I did this very quick sketch. And, I'm not very inspired by this sketch. Just using my pencils, I tried to look for the darkest values in the scene. I tried to establish where the horizon line should fall. In the middle of the page, a little bit higher. How much of my sky do I want to see? And after I did that first version, and it didn't feel like it gave me any information that really was going to inspire my painting. It felt like a way of getting to know the photo, and I think that's important. Generally, the first version of the painting shows you all the gaps in your information, and every time I spend time with this photo, whether I'm painting it or sketching it, I'm looking for adding to that information. So I actually went next and made these 3 little tiny thumbnail sketches. They almost are the size of my thumbnail. And in these, I think it's really interesting because there are small changes I made in each of these little thumbnails that simplified this. First of all, the tiny thumbnail simplified the scene. And then small changes helped me to understand how my eye navigates this reference photo. And if we look at the reference photo again, I'm just going to transition over to show you that again. What you can see is that we have a lot going on, and how do I simplify this into several small sections? Thinking of the reference photo as foreground, as water, as sky, as distant landscape. Those are 4 different elements that I can look at. But the other thing I was noticing is how dark some of the reflections on the water are. There are areas of the water that are really the same color as the sky. And then there are areas on the water that are the same color as the landscape, or maybe even a little bit darker. And so that was important to me to notice. And if you then look at my sketchbook, you can see I've sketched that in my pencil sketch here, putting in that dark shadow on the water. And I've sketched it into this little tiny thumbnail and a little bit into both of these. But in these 2 other small thumbnails, I was more concerned with the placement of the horizon. And I really noticed here that having the horizon a little bit higher versus having it lower gave me more of a sense of far distance. And I wanted to pay attention to that for future versions of this painting. I also did this little black marker scribble version of the landscape. And to me, this felt more useful and interesting than this pencil sketch. And I want to point that out as well, because my process as an artist, I'm looking for things that seem like they're going to turn a little light on in my brain and my heart. And so when I sketch something that feels, okay, this gives me information, but it doesn't feel like something I can make an exciting painting out of. Let's try something else. And so in here, I was working simply with black and white, looking for shape, looking for patterns in the subject, noticing how the dark reflection connects to the dark shape of the tree, connects to this dark shape. Where are my connections happening? And as I started to notice the way the black lines intersected and created some pattern here, that's where I started to feel like maybe I was figuring out my way through this painting. But that didn't mean, that doesn't mean I've got it all figured out yet. And I've done a couple of more experimental versions of this subject. I did this little version. And this was all kind of my research over the last week, looking at my photo and thinking about what I wanted to share with you. And I wanted to share multiple versions because one of the things I've told myself as a painter who wants to paint art that reflects who I am in my heart is I need to give myself permission to paint something as many times as I need to in order for it to kind of share who I am and what I care about, and share something that's really exciting. In this version, I feel like I'm a little bit more myself. I've got some really nice fluidity in the background. I had fluidity here too, but it was all too intense. Here I've actually muted some of my colors. So we start to see more flow and a little bit more impact in the foreground because, you know, what's going on back here is a little bit more faded out. And I'm also really liking better the more muted tones of the tree here. And I'm noticing as well, as I'm thinking and painting and noticing how I feel as I paint, I was noticing that I'm struggling with this tree. It's a kind of tree that doesn't grow in my area, like I mentioned. And so painting the shapes of this maple tree, they didn't feel the way, they didn't feel natural to me. And I knew that that meant this was a subject I was going to need to get to know better, or translate somehow into something that I was more comfortable with. So those are things that I'm thinking about as I paint. So those are all things that I'm thinking about now as I come into how are we going to paint this today? You and I looking at this subject. I've got a printed out copy just to keep close by, and that's going to be something I'll probably refer to as I'm painting. And I've also done a black and white version of the reference photo that I can refer to to help me to understand those dark patterns and shapes in the reference photo. If I squint at this and stop thinking about it as trees and grass and water and sky, take the names away and look for the way the shapes connect. That can really help me to understand how this painting fits together. And so I'll be keeping that in mind as I paint as well. And before we go there, I wanted you to understand the research I've done. And that's what those previous versions are. They're research for me. And then we're going to warm up and I want to get out of my head a little bit because I can be very academic and I'm a recovering perfectionist. And so anytime I come into my studio to paint, as a painter who wants to take care of my heart and give myself permission to do whatever I want in art, I really want to remind myself of those truths before I start painting. And so I like to come into the studio really gently. And generally I'll come to paint and start a painting session by looking around and maybe tidying up a little bit and looking for maybe whatever I've just haven't, whatever's sitting on the easel unfinished. Maybe I'm thinking about starting that. But often I'll take a piece of paper that's maybe a little bit dirty like this one, and I'll just start to paint for the love of moving color. And so we're going to start with that. I've got a couple of round paintbrushes here. This is a number 12 long round, and this is my Escoda number 10 rigger. And I usually have 3 or 4 of these lying around in different stages of worn outness. This one I can tell I've been using for a while because all the lettering has worn off the brush, but it still creates some beautiful shapes. And for my style of painting, I love a long bristled brush because it can, well, I'll show you what it can do. I have two palettes here just because I wanted to show you the list of Daniel Smith colors that is mentioned in the chat, and that will go out in your follow-up email as well. Most of those colors are in this travel palette that I take with me when I go on trips. I added a few extra colors just because I'm always trying something new, and new colors are a way that I kind of wake up my creative practice. When I'm kind of feeling like I'm stuck in a rut, I'm going to add a new color or a new brush shape, and that gives me something new to play with. So when I'm warming up, and the first thing I like to do before I start painting is just moisten the tops of my paint in my palette. I try to keep this palette covered when I'm not painting so the colors stay semi-moist. And my climate is cool enough that I don't have to worry about mold. Although if that is an issue for you, Daniel Smith says you can put a little cotton ball with a little clove oil in your palette and close the lid, and that should help keep mold from growing. The clove oil is pretty harsh, so you want to make sure it's not going to eat through the plastic. It's a whole thing. Have a little protected square or something that it sits on, I guess. Interesting that an essential oil can do stuff like that, hey? I'm just grabbing, stroking with my brush, loosening up that top layer of color, and I'm way over on the far side of the palette, so I'll just bring it over so you can see it. When I'm painting, I tend to work with a handful of colors, even though you see many in this palette. I work with just a few at a time, but I try to start with one color. And this is an undersea green from Daniel Smith. I start with one and I let it tell me who it likes to play with. So with my spray brush, with a juicy amount of pigment on my brush and my spray bottle, I'm just going to start with that first brush stroke. And this is for me as much as for you because I'm on camera, I get a little nervous, and this is a really good way of just reminding myself what I'm here for. Let's look at this beautiful wash of green color. Pay attention to what it does as that extra water moves around a little bit. I've got a little bit of a tilt on my board. I've just got this little bottle of ink that's tilting my painting surface up a little bit. It's just a corrugated plastic board. My watercolor paper, I think I have a supply list mentioning the paper I use as well. I like Hahnemühle, Arches, 2 of my favorites right now. And this is the back side of a failed painting. So it's a place, I like to think of the back sides of my failed paintings as places where I get to experiment. And so that's what we're going to start with, just to get in the zone and feel like everything is allowed. Now I'm going to try to find my undersea green again. Sometimes when I'm working with multiple colors, I'll pull that color out so I don't have to look for it in the palette. All the dark colors look equally dark. And with that long bristle brush, I can experiment with the shapes that I make using the side of the brush, rinsing the brush, coming back with water, dragging. I'm going to use the tip of the brush and create a little channel for the paint to run down over here. And a little bit of a channel over here, wider one. And undersea green is a beautiful color because it kind of separates as it flows. So it's got a little bit of blue popping through, a little bit of yellow. And then my spray bottle. It's really interesting because my spray bottle reminds me that I don't have to be in control. So there's a sense in which I'm talking to my materials as I'm painting, and they're talking back to me. So when I start to feel like something on my painting surface is too precious, the spray bottle reminds me that, I can let go. And that's what it says. That's what a spritz of water says. It says, Angela, let go. And I do what it says. I'm a good student. I'm going to grab another color. Let's grab some undersea green. And I've been working with, or not undersea green, Aussie red gold. I've been working with this color a lot lately, so it's quite moist in my palette, and I want to be careful not to grab too much. I've used these colors for many years, so I already know a lot of what to expect from them. Aussie red gold, I'm just placing some of these brush strokes. Let's grab a little bit and put it up here where it's quite wet. And I want to show you on this 100% cotton paper that some colors will touch wet paper and just go whoosh across the page. But the Aussie red gold isn't really doing that. It kind of stays where it's put. So if I want to see my Aussie red gold in that beautiful, rich red orange, if I want to see that move around, I'm going to need to use gravity. I can tilt my board. I'm just going to move that reference photo for now. There we go. So I can tilt my board and see the moisture, the water movement, pulling that color. And I can also invite some more letting go. And this I really like to do with Aussie red gold because I want to show you just what a beautiful color it makes when I start to let that water take control. And so it's just washing away into this lovely, just glowing yellow orange. Just love it. And that's my favorite thing to do with Aussie red gold. I know it's going to create this beautiful veil of vibrant color. And so these are two colors that I could see using in my trees, in my landscape painting. And so I want to keep that in mind as I move into actually painting my landscape subject. What's another color I want to use in my painting today? Let's take a look at my palette. And I'm also thinking about some of the paintings I've already done of this subject. I don't need to reinvent, my strategy today. I can work with the colors that I've been enjoying over the past few days. And one of those colors that I'm a little bit ambivalent about, I was using indigo, and you can see the intensity of that indigo in the water here. And it's a color that when it touches wet paint, it does move very rapidly. It doesn't need any coaxing with the spray bottle. And to me, it felt a little bit too intense for what I was doing in this painting. So I don't want to use the indigo. So let's choose something else. We do want to think about something blue. Maybe we'll just go to that old, traditional, beautiful, reliable cobalt blue. And It makes a lovely blue puddle on my palette. I want an inky consistency. I'm just going to use a moist brush, and we're going to just put a little spatter of that cobalt blue into this mixture. How does it play with the Aussie red gold? How does it play with the undersea green? And undersea green actually has ultramarine blue in it, so I could have chosen to use the ultramarine, and that would have been a nice option as well. We'll let it spatter up here, and we'll bring in some of that movement with the spray bottle over here. Just let a little bit of color happening. If this was a landscape, let's just imagine right now, really stretch our imagination. Suddenly we have a landscape. What could this be? A little blue to indicate sky, maybe rain. Maybe this is our maple tree with that vibrant orange. And then this would have to be some forest or something, which means that this would be our lake. And if that was our lake, well, maybe I'd want a little more lake happening coming out from over here. And maybe a little more of that blue coming from over here. And, you know, I'm an artist, I'm supposed to have a good imagination. So I'm going to try to stretch that imagination and really think about this as the most abstracted landscape that, you know, it could become. Why not? And I'm really liking, as I'm looking at this, and my goal for right now, you know, getting those nerves out, getting into a good mental space for creative and intuitive painting means I need to awaken that intuition and that imagination. And a lot of that comes from being present. What's beautiful about this right now? What's interesting? What's making a statement, and what's very subtle? And so we're seeing some very strong shapes in that original undersea green, where I've used the spray bottle and that moisture has flowed around the undersea green. We've got some very strong edges. And so those are very dominant parts of the painting. And I want to pay attention to that. I want to notice it. And I also want to agree with it. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I feel like when I was a new painter, I was always in damage control. Something like this would appear to be a problem for me. And so I would be immediately trying to solve it. But I've learned so much from not trying to solve my paintings. Instead, I'm honoring what's happening, noticing it, and maybe trying to work alongside it. How can I accommodate what's happening in my painting and, you know, let the watercolor do its thing? And I really feel like with intuitive watercolor, that's a big part of the process. And it really helps me awaken my imagination. Now I want to bring in, I'm debating whether I should bring in one more color before we move over and see how we can take this in a landscape painting direction. And it's this color that kind of surprised me yesterday. We'll pull that cobalt blue out as well. So we have those lined up here. So right now we have a blue, an orange, and a green. That's not exactly a triad, traditional triad of colors, is it? Generally, we think of having good mixing colors as having blue, a yellow, and a pink or a red. And so if I want to do some good mixing here, I could think of the Aussie red gold as a yellow, because we really do have a golden glow down here. So maybe we want to bring in something that's kind of a red. And I'm going to do that by choosing this naphthalide maroon. I have abbreviated it here, and it's a Daniel Smith color that's not going to be on the list that I gave Pamela, because I like to scare her and bring in something unexpected. And I told her I would, because that's kind of how I work. If I've committed to some colors, I'm always going to end up choosing something to, just because I think creativity is like that. It's a little bit stubborn, a little bit obstinate. It wants to surprise you. And it doesn't want to be told what to do. And it doesn't really like boundaries. It likes a little bit of boundaries. Creativity can really thrive when you're working with a few parameters. By choosing these 4 colors to work with, I can then have something I don't have to think about when I'm trying to innovate in other ways. But let's connect those 2 shapes. And then let's make this shape come down that way. And I'm not thinking about this as a landscape right now. So I'm just making a shape that looks interesting to me. And if we've got a maroon shape coming from this corner down to the middle here, then maybe we need that maroon up here somehow. And if we're going to move the maroon up here, let's make it interesting by adding, by making it a little bit paler and more diluted, so that it's not just all one note of intensity on the painting. And then let's add a little bit of water to help it to move. And I'm tilting towards this corner, so everything's kind of flowing this way right now. And yeah, we'll see what that does. Well, so the idea here, what were my goals for this little warm up? I want to remind myself of them. I want to remind you of them because it's important. It helps me not to get discouraged if suddenly halfway through this painting process, I started thinking of this as being, oh, this is my next great masterpiece and it's going to be amazing. And all of a sudden everything on the paper becomes precious. No, this painting, the goal of this painting is to awaken my creativity, to help me relax into the painting process, and to help me approach painting with a sense of wonder, presence, experimentation, asking what if, and being willing to break the rules and even fail. And if I'm giving myself permission to do those things in this warm-up, suddenly I start to see ideas and possibilities and bold things emerging. That's where painting starts to get really exciting. So that's my goal here. And that means if this turns out to be a muddy mess, but boy, I'm full of ideas, then I've really succeeded. And so that's the direction I want to take this. I just added a little bit of water here because there was a combination of the Aussie red gold and the burgundy, the maroon, that was making kind of a brown. I think some green was in there too. And I'm not opposed to brown, but I wanted to see what would happen if those colors that were floating on the surface washed down to the bottom of the page, what's underneath there. And then maybe I can bring a little bit of that Aussie red gold back into this part of the painting. So we're just going to add a little bit of that. And I know you're waiting for me to start landscape painting, and this is my process, a very non-linear process. And it's important to me that it is non-linear because I don't want my paintings to be predictable and systemized. Doesn't work that way for me. So I'm actually liking so much of this. What did we say? What if this was a landscape? What if this was symbolic of the landscape I wanted to paint today? And I'm just going to ask that big what if. I'm not going to try to make it fit the reference photo. Let's bring that reference photo back. But I just want to have that open up, that big question. What if this was the most abstract version of the reference photo I'm painting today? How is that going to change or influence how I approach the next piece of paper as I try to develop this scene? Let's find out. So I'm setting that aside to dry. I'm grabbing my next piece of paper, and most of my paintings I'm spending about maybe 20, 30, 45 minutes working on, depending on the painting. What I've often learned is that my very best paintings, the ones that are the most exciting, take the least amount of time, but there might be 20 other versions in the way, on the pathway to getting there. So that's just something I have to know about my process. It can feel like, oh, well, maybe that's a waste of paper, but I don't agree with that. I don't believe that's the truth. We're gonna let's mix a little bit of this burgundy into my cobalt blue. And I haven't actually done that yet. I know it's gonna probably make a violet. And it does. Lovely, soft violet. And I'm wondering if that would work as water for this subject. But before we go there, actually, let's just take a step back. I want to really feel experimental. And in order to do that, I have to remind myself that in art, I'm allowed to do whatever I want. So here in my sketchbook, I'm just going to grab my chunkiest pencil, this guy. And you can see it's got a really wide point. And I'm going to try to just really sketch with some simplicity what my reference photo is telling me I see. And I'm going to do this with kind of ignoring that maple tree at first anyhow. Let's see, we've got the landscape here. I have a love-hate relationship with this pencil because it is, it's not as dark as I would like. I like a pencil that makes a really dark charcoaly mark. And maybe I have one of those here today. Yeah, that's darker. So it's a toss-up. I have to sacrifice my big, bold shape for the darker mark that I wanted to make. You know, and as I've looked at this reference photo, it's really interesting because there's a lot of subtle things going on that we don't always think about when we're looking at a photo of a lake. For example, we tend to think about this distant horizon line where the water and the land meet. I don't know if it's really a horizon, but where the water and the land meet, we tend to think about that as a perfectly straight line. But actually, if you look at that reference photo, if you had a larger version in front of you, and I've been an inch from the photo just studying the different shapes, what I see is that the island, there's an island right here that's a little bit lower. So it's not actually a straight line. This drops down, and then this is a little bit further back. Then over here, the land starts moving towards us. There's an area here that's a little bit closer, and the same over here. We start to see that the line of the lake isn't a straight line at all. And sometimes we over exaggerate that. We'll be looking at a lake and we'll see the shoreline and we'll look at it as a semicircle. And that's not accurate either. That tends to, you know, then we have our trees here, and people look at that and they tend to think about the water as making a big hump. That kind of landscape interpretation, it doesn't really work either. We have to think about the fact that the water, the land stops the water. The land comes down and meets the water, and that's where everything stops, or at least what we can see is known. We can't see the land underneath the water from the angle that we're at. And then there's nearer land, and it also creates a plane. So we end up with multiple planes of distance based on how near or distant elements are to us. And so I have to think about that when I think about my reference photo. The other thing I have to think about, and I'm just going to bring it here, is the fact that I have some dark area here that's it's actually a dark reflection, but it's really hard to tell where the reflection of the water ends and where the grasses begin. So in that context, it might not actually be that important whether I'm painting water or land here. Maybe I just need to focus on the dark values and the colors that I see in that area. And in that case, what I'm sketching here is I might want to draw instead the pattern of the light reflections on the water. So the part of the water that looks like sky. And that comes down over here. And there's actually a part of the water that's reflection over here. That's a dark reflection. But the part of the water that looks like sky is this shape. And so I want to think about that. The other thing I noticed, the more I spent time with this reference photo, is that there's some really great rocks in the foreground. There's a rock over here. There's a rock over here. There's a line of rocks here that someone positioned very neatly and tidily, and I don't like that. I'd rather see them kind of scattered all over. And so I can decide to place some rocks in places that will seem interesting, and I've got way too many now, and but it gives me an idea that I can put some rocks wherever I please in my reference, in my painting. And then again, we do have a lot of dark shadows over here, so we want to think about dark shadows. We've got trees over here. Do I want to paint the near trees? And lots of questions that I have to ask myself. And then do I want to paint, put a lot of time into the sky and paint all the nuance in the clouds? And so we got to think about that. And as I'm sketching, and you can see I'm pretty careless with my sketches. And I'm also pretty untidy, pretty casual. Maybe those are both the same things. But what I'm doing when I'm sketching, and I'm actually doing this when I'm painting as well, is I'm creating symbols. I'm drawing myself a map to help me navigate the reference photo. And so my map is telling me what's important to me, where my dark shapes are, where my changes of texture are, the rocks versus the grass, where the light values fall, and the positioning of where I want these different planes of the landscape to land. And then we have that tree, the maple tree, which feels like my nemesis a little bit. We're going to throw that up here. I'm still not convinced that I can believably paint those graceful curving lines that we see in those maple trees. They are not the way my trees are shaped. And so when I paint them, they feel artificial to me, because the trees that I've seen on TV, these lovely curving maples, I see them on TV, I see them in parks. They don't feel authentic to me because I'm a northern girl with a northern experience. And so the fact that my trees are shaped the way they're shaped, and if they don't feel right to me, that says more about who I am than whether or not I'm painting them accurately. And I just think that's a really interesting thing to point out. So and then we also finally, before I abandon this sketch, I want to also think about some of those leaves. And the leaves are these beautiful spangles across the top of the reference photo. And so I want to think about the shapes that they create. There's some negative space that the dark silhouettes of the leaf shapes are creating. And how do I want to depict that? Lots of things that go into this painting. I told you it's the whole package. And whether or not I want my own painting to be the whole package. Because the other thing I want to do before I start painting my next variation of this scene is I want to think about the me of my memory when I was on location, sitting at that picnic table, looking out over the landscape. What was I looking at? What did I care about in that moment? And I cared about the wonderful sandwich I was eating for lunch, but I also was noticing that negative space of the maple tree. I was also looking across the water off into the distance. And if I call this scene to my memory, I do feel like I'm remembering a combination of the tree and the distant landscape. And I have to figure out how to prioritize what stands out in my memory and how do I show that in my painting. And that's really important to me. So memory has to be something I rely on, not just my reference photo. And it's really easy as I start painting my reference photo to start painting detail by detail and to fail to spend the same amount of time recalling my memories and how I feel about my experience there. So now you can see I've got a lot of resources to draw from. I've got a color study, which is this little wash that we've done as a warm-up. It's telling me how some of my colors interact, giving me some ideas for how things are going to combine on my reference photo or on my painting. And I've got the previous versions of the scene. You know, I've got the first version, which was just too intense and too bold. And I've got the second version, which had elements I liked, but didn't feel like a cohesive unit. And as I look at these, I also have an unfinished larger version, which I didn't even show you. And there's elements I like here too, but I gave myself permission not to finish it because I could see that it wasn't going in a direction I was really happy with. I've got that indigo again that was just taking over the painting. I've got a nice shape that I like here, but I wasn't working well with unifying it with my tree. And so it's a hot mess, and that's okay. It was showing me what I didn't want to do, showing me directions I didn't feel comfortable taking, and showing me information I still needed to figure out. So with that all said, when you come to that next blank piece of paper, it's still a great big dive into the unknown. And that's okay. That's not a bad place to be. The other thing I want to mention, I've pulled aside these 4 colors. They're sitting here at the edge of my painting surface. Actually, I'll put them up here so you can see them just a little bit better. So I've got those, but I'm not locked into that either. If I feel like I need another color to really make this work, I'm going to drag that out and use it as well. So something I did yesterday that was really fun, thinking about patterns, thinking about that, and my memories drawing from all of these little resources I've been pulling together. So I was thinking about this and how all of these black shapes kind of connected and touched each other. I'm going to use that thought process to get me started on this piece of paper. And we're going to start by just thinking about where our negative shapes of the maple tree are going to fall. So in this space right here, I've just drawn a rough kind of triangular shape with a water-soluble crayon. And this is a sepia color. When it gets wet, it's going to start to dissolve. So I can draw some shapes on here. It's going to leave some color, residual color behind, but it also gives me a lot of the ability to sketch and keep some softness. This little shape right here is going to be my tree trunks. They're actually going to continue right up to here. But so that gives me one big overall foreground shape. Another way of looking at the reference photo. And then we're going to think about our lake shape, and it's going to actually, oh, this is interesting. This little line right here could also be the edge of our distant landscape. That's at the back of the lake here, and then another shape here. And so suddenly we've got all these diagonal lines kind of radiating out from this area, which can feel then maybe like a focal point. And so now we have an idea of where our vision is kind of gonna maybe fall in the center here. We can also continue that feeling of lines converging, drawing toward this area. Let's see here. We've got that dark reflection. It's going to be somewhere over here. We've got some rocks here. I want those rocks to be in the scene. Let's put another rock over here to balance things out. And maybe something here. Then we've got our grasses over here, and then more grasses and kind of dark shadows over here. So suddenly now we have some different ways of moving through the scene. And this gives me a beginning. It almost feels like a radiant sunrise, like I can imagine painting this as a sunrise scene, which I'm not going to do. But now that we have this, all of these lines, it's another way of painting this subject. And these lines are going to tell me where to go as I place my brush on the paper. Take a deep breath, shake it out, remind myself that this is supposed to be fun. And this is a game. I'm playing with ideas, and I want to play with ideas. Because, you know, when I try to predict what everything should look like and don't leave room for surprise, I find out that my imagination's only good at thinking of things I've thought of before. And isn't that a pretty soft blue color? So I want new ideas to surprise me and to make my painting process more exciting. So let's just let that fluidity start to suggest some water. And I'm going to come a little closer so you can see what that neo color is doing. Just dissolving just a little bit. And I can rub at it a little bit and soften it. My brush will do that as I'm painting. But I like the fact that I get some really interesting lines, and I can come back with the neo color even, and maybe I want to use it to tell me where my tree trunks are going to be. And I can do that if I want to. And over top of the wet paint. So we've got that beginning with the water. The water is also going to be pretty close in color to the sky, but I think I'm going to make the sky just a little bit slightly off, not quite the same color. I'm going to add a little bit of burnt umber to my puddle here. And the burnt umber in my palette will just make a little bit of a gray variation so that my sky color and my watercolor are close, but also a little bit different from each other. My paper is dry. I always get questions about that. I like to start on dry paper. and add water as I go. By the time this painting is done, most of the paper will be at different stages of the drying process. So let's just play with getting some color on the page and then softening those edges with a wet brush. Now, Pamela, I've been talking for quite a while and I haven't asked about questions. Are there questions I could answer right now while I'm making puddles?
Yeah, there's a question that popped up here just a ways back in the chat that I'm scrolling up to find. As Sue was wondering if you ever go back into your warm-up paintings to then create something intentional.
I do, and I often do. Now, if I'm not on a timeline, which I of course was today, I'll often see possibilities that can be developed right in that moment. So I will frequently, a warm up will evolve into something that I can turn into something exciting, something interesting, something that feels like you can call it a warm up until you've decided it's a painting you're going to frame. So a lot of warm ups, I call them warm ups to take the pressure off. Ooh, that's very purple. But they often will turn into, serious paintings just because the magic happens when you let your guard down. And so, creating those spaces where you're allowed to just play. And actually, before I came on the broadcast today, I was playing with color palettes and I made this little cluster of, it looks like they could be berries. So so this is something that I would take and add details to. So that's sitting on my floor right now drying, and I'll probably add some details to that and just see, maybe it will become something. And I could see doing that with this as well. It's a lot of fun to take something that was a first layer that doesn't owe me anything and then turn it into something beautiful. Now, right now I'm seeing a winter scene. Just by those colors that I've chosen, it feels very muted, very autumn. And that combination, I want to show you this here, of the cobalt blue and the naphthalide maroon, they're separating in my palette. And you can actually see, as it sits there in a wet puddle, the blue and the maroon want to pull away from each other. And when they do that in the palette, you can know they're going to do that in your painting. And that's fun because it gives some really lovely nuance to your painting. And that's going to happen when you let the paint flow softly. And don't try to control it all. I'm just softening with a wet brush. A couple of spots where there's just dry bits of white paper, especially in the sky, because that will be very, very crisp. And I want a lot of softness in my sky so I can come in with crispness in other areas and create some contrast. You can go ahead and read any other questions, or if you have some. I'm going to start mixing a green for the background.
Yeah, there's also a question about the Caran d'Ache Neocolor 2 that you're using. I believe you marked down as sepia as your color.
Yeah.
And what would you say the pros and cons of using the water-soluble crayon is?
That's a good question. I've been using it because I've really enjoyed introducing some interesting crisp lines into my paintings. And I like the fact that it does some dissolving as I'm painting as well. So I'm not committing to anything that's too hard edged. I like also that it feels like a crayon, and it brings me back to my childhood. And I love tapping into that childlike joy of creativity that is so empowering to me, to be allowed to draw and paint the way I did when I was little. And so those are things that emotionally are connections for me. The one thing about the Neocolor is you're not going to get a fine point on it. It's like crayon, so it is kind of a little bit blunt. And so I don't have a lot of control over my shapes. The other thing is the texture of the watercolor paper means it's going to give that very grainy kind of skip across the tooth of the paper. And so you're not going to get a smooth, crisp line either. And so those could be considered pros and cons. I'm enjoying the way it works with my painting process. And so it's just something any new tool that I use, I play with until I find out how it kind of speaks to me. I'm bringing in some undersea green. I'm just going to draw it right across the page. One thing that really trips me up in being an intuitive, kind of abstracted watercolor painter is I tend to want to go complex, build in detail, you know, and try to paint all of those details that I see. And it tends to kind of complicate things. I like to think about it like telling a story. If I'm sharing an anecdote with someone and I want it to be a compelling story, I don't want to put in non-essential details to that story. I'm going to lose my audience. And it's really the same with painting. What's important to the scene? And that's why I want to paint something more than once, because the things that are important to the scene, those are the things I want to learn how to bring forth, really emphasize. And oh, let's make that brown using the Aussie red gold and the maroon together. We know they make a bit of a brown. And I'm going to just lay that over top of my Neo color and see what it does. I think a little bit of blue as well. So I want to figure out what's important in my scene and how to emphasize it. And so I'm trying to simplify maybe one simple line for the background. And maybe for my trees, maybe I don't need 3 trees. Maybe I've been getting tripped up because I'm trying to paint 3 trees. I'm still painting 3 trees. So this version is going to have 3 trees. But it might come at some point where I've decided that, you know, 3 isn't doing it for me. Maybe I just need 1 bold tree. We're gonna learn a little bit from this painting, and I'm already seeing that things, you know, I'm not loving the way my trees are going. Again, I'm fighting with trees. And when I find that I'm fighting with something, when it's not doing what I hoped it would do, what do I do? How do I react to that? How do I respond? And I have some freedom because this is my painting. I get to do whatever I want. And so maybe I let everything go. I have permission to use my spray bottle and just release as much of that shape as I can. Let's see what that does. Why not? I have permission to just completely start over. And I have, and I also can decide it's not going the way I hoped, but I'm gonna work with this. I'm gonna keep painting until I figure out what this painting has to teach me. I'm gonna let it teach me everything it can before I move on to something else. And I think sometimes we abandon our painting too soon because we just want a masterpiece every time. And so we don't have to do that. And I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking, well, but if you want a masterpiece this time, well, everyone's watching, you know, maybe you walk away from this, and maybe I should. I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about what to do next, how to interpret this. It's just amazing what spending a little more time trying to develop something will teach you, though. So we're just going to cling to it a little bit longer. Something I'm noticing, something I'm really liking, is what the green and the blue and the maroon are doing. I'm getting these lovely little watermarks right here, and they're really fun. The sky was really beautiful. And okay, so we're going to set this aside. We've got time. No matter what the clock says, we have a little time still, but we're going to move a little bit fast here too, just because we can. And this is, I'm laughing because this is the part where I can start to feel embarrassed about my process, because there is so much unknown in what in what I do as a watercolor artist. Let's get that initial shape that I did with the Neo color. Let's get it in the Aussie red gold this time. There's so much unknown that happens here. And there are artists who teach methods that have one step and then the next step, and then you have this wonderful detailed and controlled outcome. And that's not the artist that I'm excited about being. I get excited when I trust the watercolor to work with me and we work together. And I get surprised by what happens on the paper. I need more fluidity here. Let's just keep adding water. And I'm really tilting right now. And I'm going to turn off my reference photo because this is also the time after several versions of my painting. This is the time when I start turning off the reference photo and I work with what's in my head. And so let's just watch that orange a little bit of the maroon in there. Let's bring in this violet. And let's bring in some more of that cobalt blue. And I told you it wasn't going to be literal. And we're definitely not, we're outside of the zone of literal right now. And, you know, no one ever told you you only had to do one version of a subject. And there are, and I like to think of Monet because he painted, how many times did he paint the haystacks? And how many times did he paint those water lilies? And, you know, I just finished a book about his water lily paintings. And he was not finished when he passed away. He had chosen to commit to this series of paintings and it wasn't quite doing what he wanted it to do yet. And, you know, some of it was his health and his sight. He had trouble with his vision in the later years of his life, but it was also just his desire to communicate something and he wasn't sure he'd done it yet. And so he just kept, you know, bringing out new versions, big versions, committing yards and yards of canvas to this one, basically one idea. And I like that. I like that idea of giving yourself permission to say, I'm going to just keep looking for another little piece of the puzzle, another way to maybe say what I'm hoping to say. Let's see here. If we're thinking of a tree, maybe that could be a tree trunk. We'll bring in that blue, cobalt blue. And, you know, this is where watercolor helps because watercolor is such a gorgeous medium and you can let it move and do its own thing. And just be present to be a witness to it. This is a different spray bottle. It's a little bit of a finer mist. Sometimes those fine mists will create little bits of spatter on the paper. And then you know what we're going to do here? Just had a great idea. Let's turn it upside down and see how that looks. Oh yeah. Okay. So as I flipped it upside down, I start to see, what if those are my distant trees? What if this is my grass? What if my lake's not really that important? This could be the lake over here. This could even be reflection on the lake. I'm not going to rush to fill that in just because it should be, you know, water should be a certain color or whatever. So we're going to hesitate there. Let's just think about, oh my goodness, I kind of just don't want to touch it at all. I love this shape and movement here. I'm going to miss that because that's a very strong line. Let's just move that downward a little bit. Let it flow. But this is where watercolor can be your best friend or your worst enemy, because watercolor, giving it permission to do the beautiful things it does, and being present to notice, means letting go of your ego a little bit. What if, what if today was the day Angela Fehr was meant to come on Opus, um, and share a painting that really had very little to do with her. And I've done version after version after version. I've done the research, I've done the sketches, but the one that has the magic is the one that I didn't touch very much at all. And that starts to be really the truth for watercolor. The truth of art for me is that when I'm present, I can see something beautiful and I can be a partner with it, but really it does have a lot less to do with my skill and knowledge than I'd like to think it did. And it's more about me creating a space for allowing something beautiful to happen. I'm not going to touch this because this feels really exciting to me. I feel like this is something I could frame right now. And I have friends who would recognize my hand in this, even though my hand has done very little in this. Isn't that really kind of cool and profound? I'm going to set it aside, but I'm going to set it aside carefully. I'm going to just have it tilted up just slightly, just the way it is now with this little 2 inches of height or whatever it is, so that it continues to dry at this angle, so I don't have any water flowing back on this shape, on this paper. So I'm going to set that aside. And then we're going to just quickly, oh, this is so crazy. Oh, I found more paper. I knew I had one more piece. This is why I would have this process in my practice, though. This is an Escoda flat brush, by the way. They're Ultimo number 18 flat synthetic brush, in case you were wondering. But this really is why watercolor is so magical to me. And it's definitely been kind of that fight against ego, because I would like to say, well, I've got 30 years of watercolor skill. And so that's why I can make, watercolor do what I want it to do. But so much of it is letting go of that idea of this is what my painting should be, and looking instead at what is happening and becoming a willing kind of accomplice or partner in that process. And I think we don't trust ourselves enough. And we tend to think, well, nobody will understand it because I didn't use the right colors, or I didn't put in enough detail. But, maybe they don't understand it, but how does it make them feel? And I think that's something I would much rather hear people talk about, how the painting made them feel, rather than somebody going, oh, that's a nice lake. That's a nice lake. They can, that doesn't linger with you. That doesn't leave an emotional kind of resonance. And oh, there's a nice little island. And it's probably the wrong thing, because who wants a little dot dead center of the painting? I'm gonna do it anyhow. And so I just get to keep looking for things that I like. When I'm not worried about having all the answers or creating the outcome people will expect, which is hard to do. It's hard not to feel that way when you're painting for an audience, when you're thinking about who's watching and what they're thinking about it. And I haven't looked at the chat at all during this, so that I could be thinking about, what is this painting for me? And I think I had some paper towel here. I'm going to lift a little bit of this shape up in here. But instead, my painting gets to be just one little kind of continuing story. This is something that looks beautiful. Let's make another beautiful shape. Let's see what's going to happen when I mix these two colors. Do I need this tree? Do I need to put a brownish orange mark down at the bottom of the page that's not resonating for me right now? And, you can just imagine that after this camera goes off, I'm going to be continuing to ask these questions because this is my art practice. It's messy, it's open-ended, it doesn't get to solve everything today. And it doesn't get to promise that I get to exhibit all of my, greatest skills and most satisfying watercolor tricks or color combinations. But it's a practice that has really allowed me to be just to be kind of who I am, be curious about things, be be a girl who likes to notice little beautiful moments. And after this session, I'm going to take a walk and I'm going to watch for texture in the grass and tree bark, the interesting patterns of the tree branches against the sky. And all of that is going to feel like it's contributing to what I bring into my painting practice in the studio. And that's where I think that's what I'd like to help guide every artist into, that we are telling ourselves stories with our art. First of all, I'm telling myself it's okay to paint just for you. And if nobody sees it, if I'm creating something beautiful that's happening on this part of the paper, and then later I cover it up with some ugly marks, that's okay too. If I put in those trees yet again because I just keep struggling with a certain shape and I should learn already to let go of that shape, you know what? I don't have to be frustrated with myself. I can slowly develop new habits, slowly look for better ways to do things, and just continue to find joy in this artistic practice. And I thought I'd bring this up one more time because this one to me says what it's supposed to say. And no one will ever look at that reference photo and say, and recognize where I've come from to make this painting, except for you, because you were here with me today. And that's okay. This is my art practice, first of all, and I get to invite you to witness it with me. And I hope that you can carry that idea of your own art practice when you think about what you want to create and what you want to communicate. I hope that you also feel the freedom to paint the things that make your heart just kind of rush with excitement. I'm just going to switch my camera over, and I think we should have time for some questions. There we go. Put this work surface camera out of the way.
All right. Well, we've got a lot of lovely comments for you here in the chat. I'll make sure you receive all of them, Angela.
Thank you.
Really,
Yeah.
really inspiring watching you paint.
I have to tell you, I'm like, this is just such a process of letting go and stripping away. I talked a little bit about ego, and it really is because there's a part of my heart that says, oh yeah, I want to show how I abstract a painting and I want to show how to simplify, but I want to show how I do that because from a standpoint of skill, and it really makes me feel like I have to even let go of that, my idea of what I can show off as an artist with all of these years in watercolor. And it's like when you're in a relationship with someone who's willing to tell you the hard truths, and watercolor does that for me. It says, Angela, you don't need all that. Just let me be beautiful here. And so it's a little blow to my pride, but I think that was the right thing to show you today. And it was watercolor's fault.
Yeah, your teaching style is very powerful. You share the psychology of watercolor painting.
I think so.
You share your internal dialogue with all of us, and we're all so grateful because each one of us is creative humans, and we face our surface when we go to make art, and then we tackle the similar things that you're saying out loud to all of us, which is really bringing this huge feeling of connection today and gratitude. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
it's the thing that I hope to teach. I have I'm teaching a course starting in January called the Heart-Led Pathway, and it's that idea of getting out of your own way so that this stuff can come out. And it's not about watercolor as much as just that mental self-talk. and being that right kind of coach to yourself so that you can kind of abandon all of the things that you think will make you safe in your art practice, so you can really feel free to just make.
So what I'm going to do for everyone is that I'm going to copy it's the heartledartist.com where your course is coming up.
That's right, Heartlet
I'm gonna,
Artist.
I'm going to pop that in the chat right now for everyone. And then I'm also going to make sure that all of you get it in the follow-up email that I'm going to send. And there's been some talk in the chat about books. Do you have some books that are produced, or are you producing a book?
I do not. I have not had time to write a book, but I do write a weekly email that is, generally dedicated to encouragement for artists, to getting, all of these things that we get stuck in our heads about. So that's something that I do on a regular basis. Anyone who's interested in signing up for those weekly emails can sign up at angelafehr.com.
Wonderful. So Angela's email and social media links will also be in the follow-up email, folks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then is the course in Gibson's?
I'm teaching a workshop in Gibson's in August, actually. I have a 4-day workshop. I believe they'll be opening registration in February for that. And that's something else. If you want to, I will let my email list know as soon as I know, because my workshops do tend to fill up quite quickly. I'm teaching in Santa Fe, New Mexico in April, which I think might be full. My trip to Greece in May, which is going to be amazing, that's full. And I'm already talking about 2025 workshops. I'm teaching in Bar Harbor, Maine in September, and then Gibson's, BC in August. So yeah, it's a busy travel schedule, and always fun to teach in person and to talk about all of the the watercolor struggles and the artistic mindset struggles as well.
Very nice. Well, folks, today's event sold out. So I'm so glad all of you could be here. This has been amazing. Yeah. And
Yeah,
like
thank you.
more just like comments of gratitude and thanks flowing in. We do have a couple extra minutes if anyone has any additional questions.
I want to say hi to everyone whose names I recognize on the chat. Lots of familiar names from my online classes. Some that I have actually met in person too, and some of my workshops as well. Someone was asking about clove oil. I think I saw that chat there. Clove oil can be used in a closed watercolor palette to help keep mold from growing on your paints. But someone did comment once that the clove oil might eat into the plastic of your palette. So when you put it in your palette, you want to be careful that the oil isn't actually touching any part of anything that it could, contaminate, I guess.
And do you ever use watercolor crayons instead of or watercolor pencils instead of the Caran d'Ache?
I have some watercolor pencils, but I really haven't used them. Using a pencil in art has only been kind of recent for me. Bringing sketching into my practice, it's been another way of just kind of opening up the boundaries of what I like to create. But I'm very hesitant to bring in anything that makes me want to feel like I'm controlling the painting. And whenever I have a watercolor pencil in my hand, I remember being a colored pencil artist back when I was 17 and 18, and it was all about control. So generally, I tend to avoid bringing pencils too much into my creative practice. I also love like a rich, thick, juicy pigments, and watercolor pencils don't really do that.
And how do you keep things neat and tidy and clean with your big palette there?
I was thinking they were going to ask how I keep my studio clean, and that is not happening. But my palette is actually, it's not as clean as maybe it looks on camera. I don't clean my palette very often. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm looking at a yellow in there right now that has like brush hairs stuck to it. So it's not as clean as it looks. It's the answer to that. When you do work with your paint dry in the palette too, the colors tend to not get too contaminated because the paint is quite firm. And so even if I have a dirty brush and I'm brushing off, lifting up new color or different color, that other color will only sit on the surface. And so you can easily enough clean those colors off. So yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, everyone, we're at closing up time. So that being said, if you missed any of the materials today, don't worry. I'll make sure you all have a list of it, and also Angela's social media and her website and everything. It's how you can follow her, connect with her. And I guess I wish you all a wonderful and creative day.
Thank you, everyone. It was great to be here.